Welcome back to More Than a Lumpy Jumper. In honour of International Women's Day, we are talking about women's empowerment, whether the theme is hashtag inspire inclusion or invest in women, accelerate progress. What are the structural barriers for women's advancement? When a hurdle's internal, what can we do to address both? Let's celebrate women. Come and join us for being able to break from a sticky floor. Hi Bobby, it's International Women's Day. Happy International Women's Day.
Happy IWD 2024, indeed. Hashtag inspire inclusion.
Now, I think you got that off the internationalwomensday.com or .org.com, I think it is, webpage, yeah?
I did, believing that might be the theme for this year, but you're about to tell me if I'm right or wrong.
Well, it's really interesting. The International Women's Day started about 1909 and effectively comes from socialist and communist roots. So it was celebrated in socialist and communist countries. And it's obviously been sort of co-opted now and it's become very capitalist because in fact, IWD.com is a corporate organization. It's not actually a NGO. It's not actually something that works necessarily for women's rights, other than I think around about this time. So it can, amongst some women's organizations, be a little bit controversial. So they have this Inspire Inclusion logo for this year, and they do lots and lots of awareness raising. So, you know, for me, all awareness raising is good awareness raising. But prior to this year, I've seen some analysis of the corporates behind or the sponsors behind this organization. And actually, they were all men in the senior leadership. I think it's changed a lot now. I had a quick look before we came online today to see that actually their corporate partners are very different to the ones that there were a few years ago. So I think they've responded to some criticism.
Oh, that's really interesting. So I'm just here, I'm tearing up all my notes at the moment and we're going to...
Bobby, you know, I've seen some analysis of this and, you know, some people are very outraged, but because there is also then an official UN women have their own theme for this year, which is invest in women, accelerate progress. And you know what? I don't know that we need to get caught up in the whys and wherefores of that. As far as I'm concerned, all awareness is great. And both of those themes are really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I quite like the invest in women, accelerate progress. And I think that with the things that I was thinking about as we celebrate today, etc., I think both of those things do fit in. And we don't need to boundary it, as if we ever do, to two themes anyway, in the way that we wish to explore today with whatever we want to talk about.
While I was thinking about what we might want to say or what we might want to talk about for this episode, I was reminded about how International Women's Day was celebrated when I used to be in the UN and before by different organizations. And I remember on a number of occasions when I was working with the UN in Libya, the women would get flowers. And so we'd all get a rose. One of the senior management men would go out and buy a boatload of roses and give them to all the women. And we'd be sitting there going, seriously, we don't want fucking flowers. We want equality. Fuck off. We want the day off. Just give us a day off instead of a flowers if you're going to do something that's just so, performative. And then when I was a blue helmet in Bosnia during the war in the 1990s, and I was taken out to lunch along with some female interpreters by a person that I won't name. And so we had a lunch and were there as ladies sitting around a table eating lunch while the men went off and talked about important things. It was just, it does make me laugh about some of the performative nonsense that goes on to celebrate International Women's Day.
Oh, so that was to celebrate International Women's Day. Oh my God. I mean, you know, I'm sitting here squirming and I know you and I come at different vantage points from this. But, that was a ridiculous thing to do in terms of the roses, or indeed taking out for lunch with what we're actually really after. And I find it excruciating. And yet, I still bear the question that rather than damning them, what is it that we need to be about to actually support the growth of men understanding what it is that we're actually really after? How do we make them better allies? Because they're not going to do it necessarily just by themselves. Because where on earth did it come from that they thought that the way to celebrate was to give a woman a flower? But that comes from tradition in terms of, in the past, how some women expected to be treated, not me, because we've already been through the do you get flowers conversation already. But I end up being in that question of, well, what are we doing to change that? Because that was potentially perceived by others as just going through the motions.
Yeah, I think one of the things I recall last year, a great female leadership coach who I've been on her podcast and I've watched her growth in her business, Lauren Patton, and she wrote a really, really great piece on LinkedIn about this. But actually the real things that we need are, if you're going to have an International Women's Day event, then pay the female speakers, for God's sake, rather than expecting them to do it for free because, oh, well, it's a women's thing and, you're interested in it. Make International Women's Day something that isn't just a ladies' attendance thing, that encourage men to come along and have those discussions rather than have just one person giving a speech and everyone sitting around going, yeah. Have some workshops, have discussions on allyship and what allyship means, and those difficult discussions about why allyship is difficult and why some people do not want to be allies or feel that it's not necessary. Have those honest conversations that actually dig down into some of the nub of the issues, rather than do this performative, oh yeah, we have one day a year, give the ladies some flowers or give them an event and that should keep them quiet. And we're not even going to pay any of the speakers because, well, it's not really an important thing for the company.
I found a quote, and I wish I knew who it was from, but I read saying men have an important stake in empowering women. Not only does this help their partners, daughters, mothers, and sisters to achieve their potential, it also helps build a stronger society for all. And that's exactly what you're pointing to, that it can't be separate. They need to be part and parcel of the day in conversation about what really matters.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this narrative that feminism or female equality is only going to benefit women, it's only a ladies' problem, is just a false narrative. Ultimately, if we can change organizational cultures that are more welcoming to women and women leaders, all of the changes that are necessary to do that actually are real wins for men too. Because, and we've had conversations about this, how a lot of the patriarchal norms or the expectations and the strictures that are put on men as men and women as women are actually really harmful, especially when we look then at the statistics about the number of men that are suffering from mental health issues. And we talked about that for Time to Talk Day. Mental health issues, homelessness, suicide, all impact on men at far higher levels than they do for women, certainly in the Western world. And those are due to these strictures that men are held to, just as women are held to. And so none of these strictures are helpful for anyone, and freeing everyone from those in order to bring about more inclusion is actually going to benefit men too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I've been the one to say before as well, this isn't necessarily just one gender attempting to fix it for the other, because I have no idea. I'd have to go back and be talking to some of these female leaders that I work for. I mean, we're talking about when I first left the army, but they put on a male persona and they were worse, in terms of ensuring inclusion for all.
Yeah, I think that there's just like a little phrase or a concept, which is sending the elevator back down. If you're successful as a woman in leadership, that if you've done it through simply embracing all the patriarchal norms to become more like a man and to code shift into that sort of male, masculine. I'm not going to say male because I'd say masculine. We all contain masculine and feminine within us. And I think that that's not to say that masculine means male. It just is a sort of concept of types of behavior that we've attributed to a masculine. And there is this belief that women who succeed cut off the ladder underneath them to stop other women coming up because they've had to fight so hard. And actually, it's really important also that women support women and send that elevator back down. And so code shifting to a masculine or to maleness is not helpful for women. And also, it's not authentic. And we've talked about authenticity before.
Yeah. So you talk about the elevator going back down. I need to try and find where I actually read it. But the other little thing that I read was the broken rung.
Yeah.
It's like, right, I've made it to the top, so I'm just going to chop off the end of the ladder or pull up the drawbridge or whatever other metaphorical phrase that we want to come up with. But, the quote from Sheryl Sandberg, where she says, we need women at all levels, including the top, to change the dynamic, reshape the conversation, to make sure women's voices are heard and heeded, not overlooked and ignored. So that's what we're saying, that broken rung, it goes back to, I think, that one of the themes about investing and accelerating progress. This is for all and all generations.
Yeah, when I looked at the broken rung phenomenon, I hadn't seen it as something that women do. We can move on to one of the things that I looked at that found that women do. But when I was looking at this, and, we've heard that there's a number of phrases that are used in terms of these sort of discussions. So we've got the glass ceiling, the broken rung, and the sticky floor, which I'm laughing about because
that took a very nasty turn when we tried to talk about that before, and we'll come back to that.
Well, no, I'm going to have to say it now, otherwise I'll forget. We were talking about what titles we could use, and
I got muddled up with glass ceiling and sticky floor, and combined the two to say sticky ceiling.
Oh yeah,
and you heard something entirely different that we do not have to say on air.
We have to say it. I heard sticky semen, and I'm like, why are we going to be having a conversation about that? Yeah, anyway, that's just, I do have a very puerile mind. So apologies to anyone who might be offended. Anyway, sticky, you've got me doing it,
floor.
Sticky floor. So there are those three phrases that are used. And so obviously the glass ceiling talks about the sort of systemic barriers and hurdles that exist for women to progress into higher levels of leadership. And one of the articles I was reading recently was saying that actually the glass ceiling isn't the biggest barrier. It's the broken rung, because the step from entry level sort of workers to manager is the place where women get stuck more. And I found some figures for, I think it was for 2023, for every 100 men, only 87 women are promoted to manager. Worse, when you look at the intersectionality of race into that actually for every 100 men, only 73 women of colour are promoted from that first step to manager. And that's sort of the pipeline. So while lots of organisations are increasing representation of women at the top, at very top levels, and they're doing better than they have, it's a temporary stopgap if you're not addressing the broken rung element, which is effectively the pipeline.
Yes.
And so there's a McKinsey report on women in the workplace. And so they also found similar themes, that have been improvements in C-suite, but the pipeline, and they were talking not about entry to management, but sort of in the middle management level, that was being massively impacted. So there's going to be trouble ahead because there just aren't women coming along behind to keep the improvements going. And I don't know what you think, Bobby, about the issue of the great return and remote work, because for a lot of women, and also actually a lot of men, it's not so gender nuanced in this case. They find that they prefer working from home. For women particularly, they find there are fewer microaggressions and they're less fatigued, they suffer less burnout, they feel that they are more focused. But actually both men and women view it as one of the top 3 employee benefits is working from home or working remotely. Although some of the other stuff suggests that men benefit more from being on site because they get mentoring, they get seen, etc., and they benefit more than women do from those sort of visibility elements.
I never land on one thing. And again, I guess I find it difficult to land on one thing because I work in so many different organizations. So, it sounds like a real crappy cop-out to say it depends. I really think it does. But let me have a go at this, because some of the fundamentals that I think, and a lot of these things have cropped up in our other podcasts. So we go through COVID and we prove that, or for some organizations, it was proven that working from home didn't affect what was going on. Now, it's difficult for me to say that with the organization I was working in at that time, because I was working in hospitality and it was horrendous because, of course, you got a lot of people on furlough because the hotel industry was shut. And yet the organization still had to be run. So there was an awful lot of work still being done more from the headquartery type side of things. But communication was absolutely key. And so I do think a lot of organizations did learn to communicate in a way that they may well have forgotten to do, which is a bizarre thing to say, but more so when they were face to face, because it went by the wayside where it became absolutely fundamentally necessary to be communicating and communicating a lot. If you then take that forward, so that was just one example, but I take that forward to other organizations that I'm now working in, now that I've gone independent, and we haven't caught up. We haven't caught up from COVID in organizations, is what I see. And, and again, people listening to this, you may wish to refute. And if you do, we'd love to hear from you to know how you fixed it. Because the pendulum has swung too far the other way with the home working and the conflict that is created by trying to attempt to do hybrid working. Because I agree with you, focus is better at home. There is less tiredness because you're not commuting or traveling or anything else besides. There's an inordinate amount of flexibility that comes with all of that, where you can work your way. So the 9 to 5 day is gone because of where we actually are. But that works for certain types of work. But what happens when you're talking about team camaraderie, the visibility, the mentoring, the support, the learning, people learning to come to work, those things need to also be on the agenda. And we've had another conversation. I'm getting into a diatribe now, so you must stop me in a minute. But we had a conversation recently about how visible women should be. If we take it back to that, and men find that simpler than women do. We are always at home and not doing a balance of the both. How does that help fix the broken rung?
Yeah, I take that point, Bobby, but what they found in this research is that women don't benefit as much as men do from those things, from that being visible, the mentoring. They don't find those benefits. And so if they're not actually benefiting from them, then saying, oh, you have to go into work in order to get these benefits, and yet even when they were in work, they weren't benefiting from them, it's not persuasive for women to say, well, I still get fewer microaggressions at work. I still suffer less burnout. And you're telling me I have to come back into work because I will be more visible and it's important. But actually, I was never benefiting from that anyway. So you know what? Fuck off. I'm staying at home. So I take the point, we have to have people in work because of all these things, camaraderie, etc., etc. But if women aren't benefiting from them, or were never benefiting from them in the first place, then that isn't an incentive for them to come back to work. And it still comes from a patriarchal place of leaders have to be visible in this way. And we already discussed that lots of leadership traits don't have to be that sort of visibility. I think there's got to be better reasons for people to come back into work, or they need to address things like microaggressions, the lack of benefit that women get from mentoring compared to their male counterparts, etc.
I hear you. So if that's not what they're getting benefit from, so in which case I would suggest that if that is the way that the organizations are attempting to encourage people back into the workplace because they're talking about the benefits to them that aren't benefits, they need to think again to draw them back in. And equally, what does the business need? Organizations, businesses need to think about why they're actually asking people to come back in. So, what I can see is that there's a disjoint here with, somebody's going, right, we've got to show them what's in it for me. So we'll tell them this, we need them in for X, Y, and Z. Well, question, do you really need them in for X, Y, and Z?
Mm-hmm.
And then they try to change that, in their internal comms, go, oh, what's in it for me? And they don't really know what's in it for them. What does the organization need? And I do remain on this little bit of a soapbox that a fucking meeting isn't always the thing that's needed, face to face or virtually. Something can be a telephone call, something can be an email. If you are drawing people together, what are you drawing them together for? Is it a routine meeting, checkup? Do you need the agenda? Is it ideasy? Is it creative? In which case, that's workshoppy, however you want to describe it. A friend of mine, Rich Watkins, and I will put this down in the reference, he talks about the different types of conversations, the different types of meetings that we need to be in. And I strongly encourage organizations all of the time to say, what is it that you really need? And when they start getting to that and really understanding the types of meetings, the types of interactions that they require to ensure productivity, performance in whatever it is that they're actually doing, whatever their output is, then they can start taking a look at, well, so how often do we need these people in the office? How much do we need to be drawing them together? What are we drawing them together for? How do we get better at doing things virtually? I've also been appalling virtual meetings. Do people always have to have their videos on? There's all of these sort of like questions in terms of the first questions that should be being asked about what is it that you want to engender in your culture? Then when you get there, you might not be having to worry too much about the bullshit, what's in it for me, to get back into the office, because, maybe people should be, I want you all back in the office because I don't trust you. I don't trust the last 2 years where you've worked from home and got it all done and sorted during the most horrendous period of time that many of us have ever experienced, especially those that weren't used to just being at home and isolated or whatever it might be. And then all of a sudden, as soon as it's over, everyone's got to come back in droves. I don't believe in that either. I just want things nuanced and the right questions asked.
I think that that's so important, Bobby. I think you have hit the nail on the head. Many people feel that, the coming back to work or the edict of coming back to work is just because, well, we've always done it that way and we can't be asked to change it. And there's an element of this trust. But there needs to be a recognition that there is research showing that for a large part, and of course it doesn't apply to every single female on the planet, that women are thriving and are doing better in terms of work when they work from home, simply because they are removed from some of the patriarchal elements of organizational culture that do not benefit them. And I found this really cool little, and I say little because that's very important, it's a very important part, description of how female inequality is approached in many organizations. And it starts off where we have to imagine that short people are in power. So I told you that little was important, and the world is made by and for short people. Every person in power is under 5'5", and the most powerful people are rarely taller than 5'3". So you and me are running the place, Bobby.
Well, we knew that anyway.
Then suddenly the tall people are going, hey man, this is not cool. It's not fair. And everyone goes, yeah, that's probably right. And so the short people try various approaches to encourage or to create a more equal world for the tall people in this short person world. And so one approach is to teach the tall people to act like short people. So they have to stoop to get through the doorways. They have to scrunch to fit up in the small chairs. And then they basically promise them the more you try and be like a short person, the more you're going to fit right in, and then it will all be fine. Another approach might be to build, big 6-foot doorways at the back of the building, purchase bigger desks, create these special, less demanding career paths, tall people tracks. Or maybe another third approach would be to celebrate the difference, celebrate tall people's differences. They stand out in a crowd, they can reach the high shelves. So we're going to encourage them to go into jobs where their tallness is an advantage. And so all of those kind of approaches probably sound familiar to lots of people who are doing EDI approaches in work. And of course, these will only go so far, because actually they're solutions to deal with symptoms of inequity rather than the sources of inequity. And so the article goes on, it's very clever, but goes on to sort of say, basically, the approaches that work are where you look at the system, you identify where the barriers are, you then collaborate. Really, we talked about this earlier, everybody's involved in finding the solution to work out what is undermining equality. And then you start experimenting with small wins. And their experience in working with companies was doing this sort of process where everyone was involved in acknowledging there's an issue, identifying where the hurdles are, and then experimenting with small things to bring that equity back or to get rid of some of the hurdles, were much more successful than some of the sort of, as we've said, performative elements of trying to solve EDI problems.
Do you know, I love that. And the word that keeps coming out, because I was reading something, which must have been from an article that I was reading about International Women's Day, but the 3 words that jumped out at me that they were using was belonging. We've talked about that quite a lot before. Empowerment. Yeah. We're already doing this. But this word relevance. And, what you're talking about there is that when you're looking for those solutions, they have to be relevant. When we were just talking about the working from home piece and, what's relevant, the word relevance, because it took me down another track that we could be discussing on here. And you may well not have finished, but I'm just going to throw it in there so that we don't forget about it. But our own relevance, how are women going to shout about their relevance?
Mm.
And I think that has come up or jumped out at me with all of the stuff that I've been reading ahead of International Women's Day, because there is something about asking the question to yourself, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s and beyond, and some of the challenges that come as we age and remaining relevant.
Yes, I agree. And actually, your point then brings us on to the third phrase that we talked about, which is the sticky floor. And when I was looking at sticky floor, that was actually that's how women hold themselves back by their self-doubt or their self-imposed barriers or self-imposed beliefs. And I think that goes a lot of the way to the things that you're talking about, but believing that you're relevant, talking about your relevance, celebrating the relevance of other women by women. And as I said, that issue of sending the elevator back down. But there are lots of things that maybe we as women can do or support other women to do for themselves. And I'm not saying, I'm absolutely not an adherent of fix the woman, don't fix the system. But that's not to say that there are not things that we can do while all of us, men and women, are dismantling the system or tinkering with the system to make those small changes that eventually make big changes. So things like, and again, maybe these are the things that I don't know whether they are things that you can do if you are present in work rather than working remotely, or you find other tribes. And we've talked about community support and how important that is. But things like networking, getting coaching, finding mentors, finding sponsorship. And if it's not working within your organization and you're not finding it helpful, then doing that outside, because there are lots and lots of external organizations that help women with that. We've talked about networking, and some people get them, like, it brings the shoulders up. I think that's to go back to a previous episode where shoulders all start to raise and we're all quite nervous about, is that if you're not comfortable in doing networking, inverted commas, those big places, those big events, is do what's called the 5-cup coffee challenge. And that's to set up one-to-one coffee conversations with 5 people that you wouldn't normally encounter in the work week. So you're doing networking, but on a smaller scale. And again, you can do that remotely if you're not present in the office. I wondered what you thought about that.
I love that. I will come back to that, because what I was going to say about the networking point is networking for me comes in all shapes and forms and isn't necessarily, all these days getting into a large conference room going, oh my God, who am I going to talk to? it doesn't need to be like that. I have been attempting, again, this is just something that I've been doing, but I think that you're of a similar ilk, that I've been widening my network by being quite prevalent. Well, no, actually, by just looking at social media, when I was looking at these things about how people of my age now remain relevant. And I'll just bang through these and then I'll go back to them. But it was seek knowledge, embrace social media, stay fit. God, okay, so we can't do all 6. Go out, dress to impress, hell's teeth, that could be difficult, and challenge yourself. So if I just go back to the embracing social media, because I have started following all sorts, mostly on Instagram, but some of their creativity or the things that they're showing or pictures, I am going, and this is more of a commitment for this year, but I've done it a little bit, but committing to actually plopping them or things that they're doing as photographs or whatever it might be in this first instance into LinkedIn posts, or reaching out to them again on LinkedIn, people that I wouldn't normally, people I just don't know. So I guess what I'm saying is the 5-cup coffee challenge can go beyond that.
Yeah.
And I guess I've been doing that because I'm an independent and I don't have that reach into an organization that, well, I could do from a consultancy perspective. So there's modes there, but I absolutely agree with you. You don't know what you don't know until you actually sit down and start having those conversations. So I am a firm believer in being that explorer. Something that you don't think will have been of interest to you, give it a go. I mean, for me, I have run away from science, for example, all of my life. I failed physics as a child, at O level. I'm that old, yes. GCSEs didn't even come into my vocab, but then left it alone going, I don't understand anything about science. And yet the thing that I find totally extraordinary these days is about neuroscience, neurodiversity. It's a completely new avenue for me, but goes back to that seek knowledge, and challenging myself. I've ticked 3 off. Stay fit will just sort of like keep barking for the time being. But all of the rest of the things I think are absolutely part and parcel of learning more about being more inclusive.
One of the other sort of advice that I'd seen for people who were, or women particularly, who were sort of in this sticky floor situation where it was their own internal narrative that was holding them back, is this idea of the growth mindset. And you've just given loads and loads of great examples of a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset. This idea that you can't teach an old dog new tricks is just not true. And science supports that because we do create neurological links to learn new things all the time. And we can keep doing that. And the more we do it, the more brilliant it is for everybody, I think.
Yeah. I have to say, you'll love this. The other one that I found when I went down this little track about how do I stay more relevant now that I'm half a century and beyond, I went to the next list and that started with being fit. I was like, oh, for God's sake, there's got to be more to life than being fit. So I shouldn't diss it because I really should do more. But it then goes on to saying upgrade everything. So, phones, computers, etc. I really must learn about AI, another commitment here on here. It says go out, actually leave the house, keep your aches and pains to yourself. So again, my husband will be listening to this, so I've got to stop whining. Don't diss modern culture. Yeah. And then the last one I loved, because I was like, this is absolutely untrue. You can't drink like them anymore.
Boo.
Okay. Boo hiss. So I deleted that list and went for the other one, which was much more about the growth mindset. I could relate to that one, but the other one I was a bit like, nah. Still not quite sure about dress to impress yet. But then again, I have wafted around in a very bright pink suit recently. So maybe, I don't know, I impressed anyone. It was more like
I love your pink suit. I think it's very impressive. Well, something popped into my mind and now I'm trying this habit of actually listening, not to respond. And then, of course, when the thing pops in my head, I'm like, no, I'm listening. Now it's bloody well gone.
We were talking about growth mindset.
Yeah. But, you were through some of the things that you were talking about, the steps you can take. I do like the one about leaving the house. I think that's really important, especially if you're working from home. I think that there are times where I'm sit at a desk and I need to set a little timer that makes me get up every 20 minutes and stand and walk around so that I don't get up after a couple of hours and then all of the aches and pains that we're not supposed to complain about are making me walk like a little old lady as I have stomped to the loo. Another element of the growth mindset that you're advocating, Bobby, is, again, I'm still a bit of a fangirl about your somatic practices, and I've started trying to incorporate more of them. And I've been sort of linking that into another element that I think is really important in terms of this sticky floor syndrome, as I'm going to call it. It's actually this idea of engaging in female communities and female support. And for some people that might sound a little woo-woo, but I'm a great believer that if you are not feeling massively confident, that surrounding yourself with beautiful feminine energy and supportive, beautiful feminine energy can be really, really helpful and inspiring sometimes. If you don't feel it and you see other people are acting in that way, it sometimes gives you a little bit of a, well, maybe it's possible idea in your head. So I was at a women's circle last night to celebrate the coming of spring, and we did some somatic practices. So we're back on the goddess pose, which we've talked about before, which I love.
Yep.
So we did lots of goddess posing and some somatic shaking, which was really lovely. But actually the most lovely thing was listening to a group of women talking about how they feel and how they are growing and things that they are doing and some of the challenges they face, and getting support from other women, at least affirming, it's validating that they feel that way. Because I think one of the problems that when you start your self-talk is that it's easy for you to be gaslighted then by other people to keep believing that thing that you've told yourself. And you can do it with other men, but for me, I find as I've got a bit older, I've really wanted to embrace that sort of lovely sisterhood element of some of the things that I do, and find that women's validation to say, that's a valid feeling, or I feel that way too, or I've experienced that, is really helpful.
I completely agree. And a little bit like you, it's taken me quite a lifetime to want to really acknowledge what women can share together. And I guess, when we've talked before from my somatic work about how you are shaped, the world that you're born into and the world that you live in. And for a long time, for both of us, I was in a school with minimal amounts of girls. Loved it at the time because there was so much choice. But, then I go into the military, not many females there. It's taken me a while to find a female tribe. I was very aligned with my mum and my grandmother, but that's taken a while. And yet I do enjoy that now. And I think that, what I wish to ensure for others, I think about this in terms of who I'm inspired by now. But, I have got girl group. There's you for a start off. There was the lovely Nina, who we've been spoken to recently. You and I have recreated with that group from the military that we spend time with now. That's great feminine energy.
Yeah.
From that perspective, and spending time with them, Nina and friends from school. But, there's my coaching community. There's some wonderful people there. But I also love spending time around my nieces.
Mm-hmm.
It was 6 and 10. And I feel quite committed to reminding them. And I know that their mum, Sarah, is very much of the same ilk, that we share them, as is Jono, their father, but that feminine energy, because I think we lose it. We somehow lose it, and we need to make sure that we maintain it as we're all heading in the same direction. So there's many, many more of us who are actually taking whatever word we're going to use to deal with the sticky floor.
So I guess maybe one thing that everybody, well, maybe not everybody, but certainly we can agree on, is that today is a day to celebrate women. Let's celebrate all of the wonderful women that we know. Let's celebrate and say thank you for being brilliant to the women that we know. And then for the rest of the year, let's have a little think about how we can make life easier for women to grow and take the spaces that they need to take.
Amen to that.
Now, do you have a quote? Because I've got a couple, if you don't.
Oh, okay. Well, I do, but let's have them all. This is a celebration of women. So I'll go first. So this is from a woman who I am thoroughly inspired by and I completely love, and that is Maya Angelou. And she says, and this also goes to my point about bringing all generations with us. And she says, I love to see a young girl go out and grab the world by the lapels. Life's a bitch. You've got to go out and kick ass.
Love that. And it's so weird because one of the quotes I have is by Maya Angelou as well. And she says, each time a woman stands up for herself without knowing it possibly, without claiming it, she stands up for all women.
Brilliant.
And then another one by G.D. Anderson, which says, feminism isn't about making women stronger. Women are already strong. It's about changing the way the world perceives that strength.
I love that. Can I give you one more? Brings us back around to leadership. And this is Sheryl Sandberg. And she says, in the future, there will be no female leaders. There will just be leaders.
Yeah, one day.
Lovely job.
Right then. Thanks, Bobby. Happy International Women's Day.
Happy day indeed. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. All the resources are on our website and on the Spotify podcast page. If you want to get in touch with either of us to collaborate, for workshops or speaking engagements, you can contact us through LinkedIn or the contact buttons on the website. Next week, we're talking about how we can incorporate lifelong learning into our leadership practice. Come and join us in Being at Your Edge.